you to everyone who's taken some time to join us today. As a reminder, this is just the first part of a 4-part series that's going to cover infection prevention and dive down into industry-specific concerns and solutions. Today, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to kick things off and walk you through the first part of it. Before I make introductions, I'd love just to remind people that the best conversations are interactive ones. So to the extent anyone has any sort of question, please pop it into the Q&A field. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that we circle back and answer as many of them that we can during the session. To the extent we run out of time, we will circle up with you afterwards and ensure that every question is indeed answered. In terms of the contents for today, I'll cover introductions. We'll walk quickly through the history of infectious disease and UVC. Dr. Wade is going to cover how UVC works and its efficacy. And then Jennifer's going to cover why now, why you, why we're really at a very unique point in time in terms of this market flipping and inflecting. And then we'll finish up with different UVC technologies and use cases. And then, as I said, we'll hit some of the questions at the very, very end. In terms of the 3 people presenting today, I'm definitely the least interesting of this group. My name is Ben Boyer. I'm one of the co-founders of R0. And I've been diving into the problem of infection prevention since the company was born. It's become a real passion of mine. I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm super excited about where the business is today and the opportunity to create safer spaces forever. Jennifer Knuckles is our CEO and chairperson. She is an incredible leader and done an amazing job with the business. I've known Jennifer for roughly a decade, and she is a world-class executive, and the business is incredibly lucky to have her at the stern. Dr. Richard Wade is someone who I've also known for a number of years. Dr. Wade formerly was the head of Cal OSHA. He was in that position for more than a decade. He's taught at Oxford and Harvard. He's advised the Department of Defense, I believe the CDC, NASA. And what I always like to say is Dr. Wade has forgotten more about pathogens and infection prevention than I'm ever going to learn. But you're going to hear from each of these amazing presenters when I'm done. Just to kick things off, let's go through the history of UVC. Before I dive into that, I'll tell you just briefly about how R0 came to be. Initially, R0 was stood up as a response to COVID. This was back in March, April of 2020 when we were in the early innings of the pandemic. And the one thing I could say about my interactions with people in a variety of different industries is no one knew what to do. I had a thesis, and my thesis was, while COVID was scary and obviously a new pathogen, the world had faced pathogens forever. And there must be some organization out there that has some semblance of an idea of how to deal with them. After thinking about it for a while, I came up with hospitals. And really the thesis there was ever since the advent of the hospital, it's the one communal gathering place for the sick. And if generally speaking, everyone on this call can go into a hospital and receive care, despite the fact within the 4 walls of the hospital, they have C. diff, pneumonia, MRSA, Candida auris, now COVID, then maybe they know how to mitigate the spread of infectious disease. And so before R0 existed as a business, I started to become a student of infection prevention and healthcare. What I learned is it's very consistent across all the different hospitals that I spoke to. They think about risk against 3 dimensions: air, hands, and surfaces. And I was expecting to find a lot of technology. I did not. I found a lot of chemicals. I found a lot of filters. But what limited technology that I did run into was UVC light. I knew it was germicidal, but that was the extent of my knowledge. And so I became a student in UVC. And I want to cover right now some of the different things that I learned about it. So UVC, in terms of a light form produced by a germicidal lamp, has been used since the 1800s to kill types of microorganisms that typically cause indoor air quality problems like bacteria, mold, yeast, and viruses. Dr. Niels Finsen was the first to employ UVC in treating disease. And in 1903, he won the Nobel Prize in medicine for his work with UVC in the treatment of lupus. He invented something called the Finsen curative lamp, and there's a photo of it on the slide. It's the product that has a bunch of different arms, almost looks like a spider's legs. And that product was used successfully from the early 1900s to the 1950s. In the 1910s, UVC was used for the very first time to disinfect municipal water. And today, UVC is utilized in more than half of all municipal water systems across the country. Westinghouse developed the first commercial UVC germicidal lamps during the 1930s. And they were used primarily in hospitals. And interestingly, that use case continues to this day. And R0 sells a very successful product called ARC into many, many hospitals. In 1937, Dr. William Wells conducted a study that successfully used upper room UVC to prevent the epidemic spread of measles among children in suburban Philadelphia schools. During this study, 53.6% of susceptibles in schools not protected by UVC were infected, while only 13.3% of susceptibles in UVC protected schools were infected. This translates to a greater than 75% reduction in the spread of measles achieved by installing upper room UVC in classrooms and bathrooms throughout their schools. And you can see a photo of the upper room system in the Philadelphia schools in that picture in the lower right. This study was the inspiration for our Beam product, which is the most powerful upper room system that's ever been developed. Also in 1937, Dr. Daryl Hart conducted a study with UVC for the disinfection of hospital operating room air at Duke University Hospital. The study was designed to irradiate the whole room with special emphasis on the volume around the surgical site and instrument supply tables. Hart reported the reduction in the postoperative wound infection from 11.62% without the use of UVC to 0.24% with the use of UVC. This represents a 98% reduction in HAI risk with the use of UVC. After World War II, UVC was incorporated into air handling equipment. It became a major component in the control and eradication of tuberculosis. During this time, UVC was commonly used in the US for sterilizing air in hospitals, kitchens, meat storage and processing plants, bakeries, breweries, dairies, beverage production, pharmaceutical plants, and animal labs, anywhere microbiological contamination is a concern. Until the COVID epidemic, these years represented the peak usage of UVC in the United States within the built environment. Unfortunately, during the 1960s, concerns about microbes decreased with the introduction and increasing availability of new drugs and sterilizing chemicals, which set the stage for the US being ill-prepared for the COVID pandemic some 60 years later. The energy crisis of the 1970s sparked enthusiasm for conservation. To save energy, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems were shut down when not in use. Condensation that had previously been evaporated by the constantly moving air collected on coils and in the drain pan. Mold and other microorganisms multiplied in this dark, wet environment. When the systems were restarted, microbial contaminants were circulated throughout the building. These issues persist today. During the 1970s, ASHRAE developed Standard 62.1, which set ventilation rates for building codes across the country. This standard optimized for three things. 1, thermal comfort. 2, removal of body odor from schools and the workplace. And 3, energy conservation. In late last year, ASHRAE acknowledged that 62.1 was not effective for the prevention of infectious disease. It came to this determination based on COVID's significant and continuing impact on the US, the up to 40 million cases of influenza each year, 20 million cases of norovirus, the impact from RSV, and the fact HAIs are the 4th leading cause of death in the US as well as the #1 preventable cause of death in the entire country. Their answer to this was ASHRAE 241, which was released in June of this year. It's a code enforceable standard with the stated goal of setting a ventilation standard that helps prevent the spread of infectious disease. This is the world's first healthy building standard, and it was based on the extensive body of evidence showing a reduction in infection rates with an increase in ventilation rates. This slide shows you where we are today with regards to ventilation, building code ventilation rates, and what this new ASHRAE standard is going to require. As you can see, today classrooms have been built to a EACH, or equivalent air change per hour, of somewhere around 2.8 to 3.5. That number is different based on room type. The new ASHRAE standard calls for that figure to move to 8.3, which is an incredibly large increase in the level of ventilation. Healthcare, as you can see, they look at every room type differently, and that's one of the reasons why we're so excited about the 241 standard, is it doesn't treat all spaces the same. The CDC came out with their own standard, which just said everything should be at least 5 equivalent air changes per hour, which I think is directionally right and correct. Where ASHRAE took it, though, was to look at every room independently and how they're utilized. So a gym, for instance, you're going to be breathing heavier than hopefully you are in a classroom. And within the healthcare setting, as I said, exam rooms have moved from 6 to 8, so that's a 33% increase. Patient rooms have moved from 4 to 24, or a 6x increase in the number of equivalent air changes per hour. And then the waiting room within the hospital is moving from 12 to 40, which is a 3.3 times increase in the level of ventilation. On the office side, the half air change per hour is what most office buildings operate today, and that's what the original 62.1 building code stated. And the new ASHRAE 241 is to move that up almost 3x to 1.3. As you can see, they also looked at public assembly, religious, and there were some very large increases. Gyms, I believe, moved from 3 to close to 12. And again, to us, this is one of the most important things to come out of COVID, was this very granular look at the entire built environment, understanding how these spaces are utilized and thinking about what would be required to bring people together safely, such that there's not rampant transmission of infectious diseases. In terms of how organizations are going to respond to meet the new standard, today there's really just a couple of different interventions that are available. In some instances with modern HVAC systems, you have the ability to increase the number of air changes per hour. Usually it's not monumental, but somewhere in the neighborhood of half to 2 air changes per hour you can dial the system up to. The issue with doing so is you will wear through the product faster. So it's a mechanical product and it will have a shortened life. The other issue that you run into when you start increasing ACH on the HVAC side is energy consumption. The other things that we listed out here, expense. So if your HVAC system is not able to be dialed up, you might have to replace the whole thing. It's not typically configurable by room, and risk is really determined by room. That's how ASHRAE views it. R0 built a risk model that's able to look at sort of the room dynamics and determine what the risk is for any given space and how it's utilized. As I mentioned, there's the energy costs, and there can be issues with occupant comfort as you try to mitigate the risk with HVAC alone. Portable filters are another way to go. These units also have challenges. One of the interesting things that we've learned is one of the sort of early interventions that most of our customers at R0 utilized to try to deal with COVID was to buy a lot of portable filters. Today, the vast majority of those products are not in use. And ultimately, the reason why is noise. Schools in particular purchased a lot of filters, and in situations where they're still being utilized, they're typically being run on either the lowest setting or the second lowest setting. Unfortunately, when the filter company does testing for their devices and makes their claims about their clean air delivery rate or how many air changes per hour they would add to a space, it assumes that the product is running at full speed. But because of the noise associated with running a fan that fast, the systems are almost never operated at those levels. They're also very expensive to maintain. I am a proud owner of a bunch of filters in my home. And one of the rude awakenings that I woke up to was I spent more per year replacing filters for my devices than I did buying the devices. So it's a very large investment that might not seem as expensive upfront as it is over the long term. But there's a number of issues with trying to mitigate the issue with portable systems. The one thing just to call out, it's on the slide, the 1 to 3 EACH is really best of breed filters in spaces. The metric that's most important when trying to determine what the benefit is of adding a filter is the clean air delivery rate. How much air is actually being cleaned in a given space. When you have that number and you know the size of the room, you're actually able to calculate what the EACH add is for that room. And again, if the product is being operated at 20% of power, you're losing 80% of whatever it is you think you're getting by buying a filter and running it in a space. The other thing you can do is UVC, and both the CDC and ASHRAE are big proponents of UVC, particular upper room systems. The reason why UVC is attractive is there's typically not moving pieces or parts. So these are products that if you buy and have installed, they have very long lives. They're operating with just light. They're entirely safe if they're commissioned, and that's one of the things that's very important is as any of you look at bringing UVC into a space is to ensure that it's a product that's actually been commissioned and you understand output. But these things can add a tremendous amount of EACH into a space. As a reminder, we saw some very large increases going from 62.1 to 241. And a hospital waiting room now has to get to 40 equivalent air changes per hour. You can't do that with filters and mechanical HVAC. If you architected an HVAC system to operate at 40, one, it would be incredibly expensive, but two, it would be like working in a wind tunnel. There would just be a tremendous amount of airflow, which would be just impossible to work within. UVC is silent, UVC is invisible. And UVC across a century of science is proven to be the most impactful as it pertains to person-to-person infection or disinfection of a space. I'm now going to hand it over to Dr. Wade to give you guys a sense for how UVC works and its efficacy.
Thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but as a practitioner of public health for 40 years, I'd be remiss to remind people that COVID is not gone. COVID is still with us. The new emergence of the BA strains, then the XB5 strains, has had hospitalization increases of 18% in the last 4 months, and deaths have gone up 10% over what they were 4 months ago. So the COVID virus is still there. It's continuing to mutate. It mutates about every week or 2 weeks as a new strain that's evolved. We also have seen an emergence of norovirus, influenza, Rouse sarcoma virus, and certainly hospital-acquired infections are still with us, although being attacked effectively in hospitals. There's also emergence of fungi. Fungi, some people think, are going to be the next virus. That there's more fungal diseases, particularly C. auris, is a opportunistic fungus that lives on the skin, and with people immunocompromised with other diseases is becoming a great cause of morbidity and mortality. So that's a growing concern with C. auris. WHO and CDC, World Health Organization, CDC, now have 300 viruses that are endemic in animal populations, which have the ability to be go epizootic between animals and humans. So it's 300 viruses under potential, similar to what the COVID virus was, but they're always being monitored. And then we have the emergence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, that as these bacteria are proliferating and mutating, becoming more resistant to antibiotics. The last data that CDC published showed between 3 and 5 million people die worldwide of antibiotic-resistant diseases each year. These diseases people get from bacteria that we all know that are becoming more resistant to antibiotics, and people succumb to the disease because of not being receptive to antibiotics. All this adds up to the need for what Ben was talking about, looking at ways in which we can clean air, ways that we can reduce risk of surfaces. And I come back to the same point time and time again. Our objective in infection control and use of technologies, whether it's chemicals or ventilation filters or UV light, is not sterilization, it's risk reduction. It's trying to reduce the risk of exposure to organisms by reducing the concentration. My job that I work as a consultant is helping clients looking at their infection control programs and challenges and their space. And the two important issues there is each program has to be tailor-made to an individual space. So as you're looking at what you're going to do in your facilities, you need to look at unique characteristics of your space and what your program dimensions are. And then you can fit technology and options are the ones that Ben just went over. I first became familiar with UV light. I was working in pathogenic virology labs, which are called P3 facilities now. We were working with human viruses. So we had to protect ourselves and protect the viruses getting out of those laboratories. And this is in the 70s. Yes, I'm an old guy. It's the 1970s, not 1870s. So let's just be sure on that. But we used UV light in our lab. So that we had UV lights all night in the lab to reduce the viral concentration. So this is well known. I'd like to walk you through a couple of slides now, just sort of behind the scenes, what the chemistry is and the physics. UV light is nothing more than a light. It's an energy source. You can see from this slide the visible light here between 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers. And UV light is just below that. You get UVC at 254 nanometers and far UV at 220 nanometers. So it's just below the visible light range, but in an area that you have a tremendous amount of energy. As you can see from the top of this graph, as the wavelength decreases, the energy increases. So one ran to far right, you've got radio waves, AM, FM, TV, have great penetrating ability, and those go all the way down to gamma rays, down to 0.0001 nanometer. That's a billionth of a meter. The energy increases. So we have UV light, which is sort of in the middle, but does have great energy and penetrating power. Questions come up about how does UV work? Well, I think all of us have seen descriptions of DNA and RNA. That's that double helix models, that it just has 4 nucleotides, that the combination of those nucleotides make up the cell's going to do, what each individual cell chemistry looks like. And the germplasm makes every one of us different depending on those 4 little nucleotides and how they are arranged in that double helix model of the DNA. What UV light does is the energy penetrates that DNA molecule and it blows it apart. Here you can see from the green what's happening to those little pairs of 4 nucleotides on that strand, double helix strand, it blows them apart. When that occurs, it either kills the cell, bacteria or fungus, or inactivates the virus where it cannot replicate. And if viruses only have one mission in life, and that's to replicate. But if they don't have the correct DNA or RNA to use to replicate, then they cannot reproduce. And that's why it becomes virucidal. If it's on a bacteria or a living cell, or a fungus, a living cell, then destroying the DNA of that cell means that that cell can't replicate as well. So that's how it works with UV light. This is a picture of a number of different viruses. You've got the top left, you've got an adenovirus, which is a common cause of colds. And the lower right, you've got a red one, which is the SARS coronavirus, the relative size of those viruses. And on the axis here, you see what the energy level is to inactivate these viruses. Remember, you can't kill a virus because a virus isn't alive. A virus is innate, but it steals the DNA, RNA from living cells so it can replicate. But you can deactivate that with energy. It's measured in millijoules per centimeter squared. That's the amount of energy it takes to deactivate it. And these are all for viruses of fairly low levels of energy, because the viruses are not well protected with coatings. They have either a lipid or a protein coat, but that is blown through by the UV light and gets to the DNA or RNA, depending on which type of virus it is. Looking at the hardest to kill, the fungus, the reason they are because they have a thick protein exterior cell wall. They're large cells with thick protective covers. The bacteria have a lipid and protein cell membrane, but these membranes have what's called mitochondria, these little indentations where the cell produces its energy. That has DNA in it, and the DNA and RNA in the mitochondria are blown apart by the UV light, and that's what destroys the bacteria. Viruses, on the other hand, are relatively easy to inactivate because they don't have those protective layers. When looking at UV light, there's 3 things you really have to look at. And as Ben indicated, you have to design how much energy you're going to put into a space. You can change the lethal dose to all these organisms, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, or fungus, depending on the dose of energy, UV light you're generating, the time you have that exposure, and how far you are from the light source. All 3 of those are variables. And that's why it is critically important before you go out and spend money to buy any UV system, membrane, or filters or HVAC system, you need to fully understand the space you're working in. And particularly with UV, you have to be sure that the UV system you're putting in is designed to achieve the lethal dose that you want, to achieve the degree of infection control that you want and risk mitigation in your space. This is a list of some of the work that's done by R0 of efficacy. This is done by independent laboratories where the laboratories were given an organism and using some R0 technology, looked at how effective that technology was of inactivating that virus or killing the bacteria. We've got some well-known bad actors here, such as E. coli, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. We've got Staph aureus, we've got Pseudomonas, C. diff, influenza A virus, monkeypox virus, human coronavirus, feline calicivirus, and the fungi there of Candida auris. And you'll see the ranking there of 99.99% effective at reducing. That means from the organisms that were seeded in the test to the once your exposure occurred, that there was a 99+% reduction. I personally don't get hung up on whether it's 99% reduction or 99.99% reduction. If you're getting 90% reduction, you're doing very well. You know, comparing that to chemical treatment, numerous studies have shown if you go in with a well-trained staff into an OR and do terminal cleaning, or a room where a patient is being discharged with terminal cleaning in the hospital, at best you're going to get 50% reduction in the organism loads, just because of all the spaces that have to be covered physically touching it, and also the inaccessibility, such as under a bed frame and so forth. So 99% is extremely good. If you want to sterilize something, that is a prescribed number by CDC and the health authorities. That's 99.999%. That's sterility. We don't produce sterility of anything we do. The design is not to produce sterility. The design is to reduce the levels of which we maximally can. And 90%, 99% are extremely good numbers at reducing risk. And again, studies have shown 50% effectiveness of decontamination. That's a well-trained, clinically situated people working in decontamination efforts. What a lot of people mix up is the difference between cleaning and disinfection. If you look at the CDC and FDA registration of an EPA registration of disinfectants, it all says you have to clean first, then you disinfect, then you can get 50% effective of reducing the number of organisms. That's a 3-step process, and most people just do one. You spray and go, or you wipe and go with a disinfectant. So you're lucky if you get 50, you're probably getting less than 50%. And a UV light, whether it's UVC or far UV, you're in the 99+% effective. And one of the interesting things that just came up in the last couple months, studies showing that the number one disinfectant used in clinical settings are quaternary ammonia compounds of different formulations, but they're all based on quaternary ammonia. It's not effective at killing C. auris. And the reason is because C. auris, as I mentioned, has this thick cell wall. It's difficult to penetrate through, and it is difficult to get at it. And so quaternary ammonia is not effective. We know UV is very effective. When you're going out and you're looking at different technologies, particularly UV technology, as an independent person, I'd say, look at these following things. Ask the person who's producing the product, what's the literature show? What is their collection of literature? How much do they know about the literature? There's 80 years of literature that show effectiveness that Ben had mentioned, the early start of measles, and some of the TB epidemiological studies that's out there. In-house testing. Was the testing done on efficacy by the company itself, or do they go to outside independent laboratories? It does make a big difference, and you should be looking for independent laboratory testing. Also, look, the next level of quality control is in-room testing. Did they do any hospital testing? Did they do any school tests? There's always a difference between what's done in a laboratory versus what is in the real world. And so looking at how effective is this technology in the real world. And R0 has done that both in the hospital rooms and in schools. The use of dosimeters. One of the big questions comes up with clients saying, I got this magic light that goes on, you shine it, and the bacteria or viruses go away, but I can't see that. How do I know it's effective? How do I know I'm getting the right dose? And there are 2 ways you can do that. You can use chemical dosimeters, and that's just a simple card, and the card will tell you what the dose of radiation of UV light that is given, and in your space, on that wall, on that bed, on that bureau, it'll tell you exactly what the dose is, and you can relate that to the lethal dose that's required for that organism. And also, R0 uses biological indicators, and these are small tubes the size of your little finger that you can put into a room, and they have microorganisms in it, encapsulated, and the UV will penetrate through there and give you an indication on that if there's you've had the dose that'll kill the organisms in the vial or not. So that's another level of demonstration efficacy. And finally, epidemiological testing. Have any studies been done to show reduction of disease? Not reduction of organisms, but how many reduction of diseases have occurred? And our Zero pioneered this work and schoolwork that is going to be, I think, brought forward in future presentations in this session. And that's published work of reduction of indication by measuring wastewater viral loads coming out of schools and pre and post UV light. So that's just some guidance as independent consultant, give you some thoughts as you dwell into these in your later sessions. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer, and Jennifer is going to talk about why now.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Wade. All right, so just a little bit of background on myself. Ben provided some. I spent a decade working at Clorox, which I'm sure all of you are intimately familiar with as consumers. I worked in our hospitals and janitorial and sanitization businesses, and what we did on the professional side was sell Clorox products into those three areas to remove essentially hospital-acquired infections. So 1 out of every 5 people that goes into a hospital exits with something they didn't have when they went into the hospital. And Clorox is very adept using petrochemicals at removing both cleaning and disinfection, as Dr. Wade provided the difference between by removing 99.99% of pathogens on surface. So the big key here is that issues with indoor air health have really not been solved, and none of the large companies have been able to do this. The use of chemicals is very prevalent on surfaces. You do require manual labor, and you do require constant repeat usage of chemicals, which have kind of disastrous effects into the environment. However, air has not been cracked, and it's been a long-standing problem. Really became much more light shed on it over the past couple of years. And you're seeing this as a result of what happened specifically within COVID, that people are aware that pathogens spread through air. It's actually the hardest to crack, and it is where most pathogens spread. And I'm going to show you that. So we really are at a tipping point now where the issue has been forced. When you think about the spaces that we all gather inside, the best of life happens here, right? Humans are social creatures, and we spend 90% of our time indoors. That's for our little ones, our kids. We want to keep them safe in school. We know the importance, as we've seen over the past couple of years, of detraction in test scores. We're really doing a disservice to the future generation. Second, we want to keep our frontline workers safe. So imagine all those people that are protecting our children, ourselves, our aging parents in the hospital setting. They come into contact with so many people every day. And so a patient zero comes into a hospital, 1 out of 5 people that I mentioned contracts something, leaves with it. But then that hospital worker also carries it to all of the other patients in the hospital setting. And she herself brings it home to her family. And then third, we really need to keep our economy thriving. We all know as commercial people what happened when things were put on pause. And so if you think about the need to gather in person, have the public sector functioning, hospitals functioning as they should, senior care facilities safe, schools operating, it's really important to focus on the air indoors. I live in California, where every fall, right around this time, we have terrible outdoor air quality because of wildfires. And so people are intimately familiar with what happens when you feel badly from smoke inhalation. You don't want to go outside. That's why it's so important to treat the indoor air the same way. So what does effective disinfection do? So I think it's really important to consider outcomes. So being 99.99% effective, what this means is our products, the R0 products, can generate the highest effective air changes per hour. And as Ben mentioned, there's been a lot of solutions that have been used historically and also most recently because organizations have really understood the importance of air changes per hour. The most prevalent solution being used right now is heating and air conditioning services. And what those services are designed to do, those systems are designed to do, is heat and cool buildings. So they're not actually designed to push air through the buildings and move the airflow for a safe, effective air change per hour. They're really designed to change the temperature in the room. What happens by running the heating and air conditioning much more is that we're turning off as a country, as companies, a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So our zero devices run on standard electrical, and we use 5% of the GHG versus the HVAC. We also run about 1/20th the cost of an HVAC system. So many of our customers have seen their heating and air conditioning bills skyrocket, of course, because of the overusage, but also because of the rising costs of energy. One of the large school districts we work with, it's the 5th largest in California, has about 70,000 students. They have a new protocol where they run their air conditioning 2 hours before anyone sets foot in the building and 2 hours at the conclusion of the day. That's really a waste of energy and is really expensive to the school district. So they are looking at our zero, using our zero devices. As Ben mentioned, and Dr. Wade also mentioned, this has really come to light, and the CDC and ASHRAE have published standards that are addressing the indoor health across industries. The CDC actually recommends the use of UVC, and ASHRAE has not only drafted the standards, but in record time, they published for public consumption and then the final standards. And what these are controlling for is minimum requirements to stop the spread of airborne infection. So ASHRAE in particular is requiring specific enhanced ventilation during times of high risk. This is code enforceable now for all new buildings as well as retrofits. So as Ben mentioned, there's very specific requirements by vertical, which we're going to go through with all of you in the following installments of this webinar. So you'll know based on your own individual spaces what you need to do to be code compliant. The CDC has also similarly developed guidelines to protect the public health. And so the CDC is recommending at least 5 effective air changes for all occupied spaces. The rooms that you all are in, the room that I'm in an office space right now, on its own is probably running about half an air change per hour. Using an HVAC system gets it up to 2 to 3, and that's running an HVAC system at high usage. So there needs to be something for the minimum usage required or specified by the CDC to get it to that 5. And then as we mentioned, ASHRAE actually requires much more extensive air changes per hour. So when you think about public spaces like hospitals, waiting rooms, gymnasiums, places of worship, the numbers are double digits required for per hour. So I'm going to go through a couple examples to really bring this home to you. So I want to really show you what our solution is. If you think about this, it's a hardware and a software solution combined. So on the right-hand side, what I'm going to show you, the very tall unit is called the Arc. Then you have, and that's a mobile unit, and I'll go deep on that. And then we have 3 installed products that you see on to the left of the Arc, the left of the tower. Those are mounted in rooms. And then on the bottom of the screen, you see our sensors, as well as the dashboard that you all have real-time insights as to what's happening in your indoor spaces. So what my objective is, as someone who's very, very passionate and deep-setted in disinfection, is to really make our shared public spaces safer and provide access to all of you to do that. Historically, UVC has been so expensive that only hospitals and large hospital systems have been able to provide. So, for example, the UVC tower, that tall aqua lighted instrument you see on the right hand of your screen, some competitors sell this for about $160,000. It means that only large-scale institutions could actually invest in this. My objective was to use technology to make this more affordable so that we could democratize access to UVC. And we'll show anyone who's interested can find out about this, but we sell for 1/20th the cost of a competitor. The other things that we do is we provide real-time risk scores to all of you. So taking in all of your own environmental data so you know how risky your space is. And then we do API calls automatically to our installed devices so those devices are used in the most risky spaces. And then we provide the outcomes for you. So you see your effective air changes per hour, you see your ozone layer levels, you see your oxygen levels, you see your indoor air quality, everything, so your indoor space is made smarter and more intelligent for you. So let me show you the products. Just a reminder how pathogens are primarily transmitted. I really talked about this, but it's surface, airborne, and person to person. And each of our products addresses this. So we have solutions that help in all areas. Okay, so here's our ARC mobile tower. So what this is that aqua product that I showed you. This is used for routine disinfection and room turnover. So our hospitals, our education customers, our public sector customers use this to push through areas where there's been an outbreak, or where the room needs to be turned over. Just last week, one of our school districts had an outbreak of norovirus, and they ran their ARCs. They have multiple ARCs. They use them across their full district. They ran them for 57 cycles to completely disinfect their locations. So in as little as 7 minutes, ARC eliminates 99.99% of the microbes in an unoccupied room. So this is really perfect for a high-risk space like bathrooms, patient rooms, kitchen, that there's an on-demand disinfection. What I'm really excited about is the installed products, and there's 3. Beam, which is our largest, most efficacious product. Ben talked about this and the genesis of this product, actually dating back to early 1900s. The technology hasn't been adopted widespread. So what this is, and you see it on your screen, it's above the woman having her physical therapy session. What it does is it's the first upper room UV system that can disinfect large volumes of air. And it's typically used between 500 and 1,000 square feet, depending on the ceiling height, depending on the mounting and the configuration. And it can actually be used up to 5,000 square feet. So for any of you who are in a school district and you want to consider, for example, your multipurpose room, your common room, your gymnasium, a beam could be mounted in every gym in high schools across the U.S., which is about 5,000 square feet for one beam, based on the mounting and how it exudes the UVC and protects all the students and the faculty who are within that one location. And it typically provides 10 plus air changes per hour. And it only consumes the energy of a laptop charger. So really, really sustainable and good for the environment, as well as efficacious. The second installed product is called the Vive. The amazing thing about Vive is this is for both surface and air. So many of our customers use Vive in bathrooms, in kitchens, in nurses' stations, in patient rooms. So this is far UV technology. I should just really, really want to emphasize the installed products are used in occupied rooms. So this is a device that really emits a cone of light continuously, autonomously. None of your staff actually need to interact with this. Real-time disinfecting air and surfaces in rooms up to 200 square feet. So if Dr. Wade and I were in the same room, Dr. Wade had a staph infection, he was patient 0, I would not get sick. If a school was an outdated facility, had mold in the corner, mildew, I would not get sick. This is real-time disinfecting and stopping the spread of the pathogens. And then I want to show you our risk model. So what we do, we have a proprietary risk model, and we take, and this is full access to all of you, we take all of your inputs. So your room dimensions, your targeted ACH, your environmental factors. So this is like your temperature, your movement, the number of people within the location, the type of person. It's all anonymized, but it's based off of an infrared camera. So we can see if it's a doctor versus a nurse, a patient versus a student versus a teacher based on height. And essentially what we do is we take all of those environmental factors and we model the risk for your room. And then what your outputs would be is a percentage of risk reduction, the number of devices that you should have in this room to provide the optimal coverage, risk classification for each type. So we do high, medium, low. For example, if you have an individual office, no one else comes into it, it's not a transient population, you would probably rate that as a low, and it's very low risk. And then we do the before and after air changes per hour. Then we do our continuous risk monitoring and notification with our proprietary software, which is called R0 Connect, and we give you an indoor building health score. And what this allows you to do is understand, based on your occupancy and your environmental data, how the room is performing and what mitigating steps needed to be taken. The devices only run when the room is at high risk or when they need to. So again, it's kind of a secondary benefit that you're using very low energy emitting devices. So really good for the environment, no chemical waste, no high energy costs, but they also only need to run when the room is at high risk. I also just want to note, just again, based on spending a decade in disinfection and cleaning, as Dr. Wade mentioned, we're really relying on manual protocols for much of the cleaning. And so there's such a shortage of staff here in the United States right now. It's very difficult to get both frontline workers as well as custodial and janitorial staff. Many of our customers are actually using R0 devices in replacement of their staff because they can't hire the staff. So school districts don't have the janitorial services they need. They're running about 1/3 less than they were 3 years ago because people have moved, people are making different decisions. So it's really important to be able to use technology to supplement your existing manual labor and make it more efficacious. We have used, we take our efficacy and our data really, really seriously. So we run studies at the Mayo Clinic, with Harvard, with Columbia. We ran with Trilogy Health Services because we want to have studies at a vertical level so that they're applicable to each of you in your own vertical. We also ran at a very large school district. So at the Mayo Clinic, we saw 96 to 99.8% reduction in hard to inactivate, deactivate microorganisms. At Trilogy, we saw an 80% reduction in the surface bacteria that was detected and a 93% reduction in the airborne microbes. And at the top 5 school district, we specifically did this against COVID, given their issues last year when they all returned to school. Many school districts are all still seeing numbers of kids out during cold and flu season, COVID, RSV, which is impacting their absenteeism rate, which is impacting their funding. So they saw 53% reduction in the COVID-2 levels. And then we've also had all of our independent lab studies done, as Dr. Wade mentioned. We have these across all of the microorganisms, from E. coli to MRSA to pneumonia to staph infections, as you'll see. And so we test in real world test conditions so that it's not just academic, but it's brought into the real world. And so what this has resulted in is we're really deployed at scale across 4 industries. So I am focused on healthcare, education, government and the public sector, and commercial real estate. And so this is just the first installment of a 4-part series. We are going to go deep for each one of you in your relevant industries. I'm very thankful to all of you for focusing on using technology, challenging the status quo, looking to see what's possible to keep your constituents safe. And really my role is just to provide education and see how I can help. So I'm going to turn it over to Q&A because I think there are a number of questions. This, of course, is recorded. We're also going to send out the script and the recording to all of you. I would love for you to attend with us over the next 3 installments. But you can see that we're deployed across large hospital systems that you all recognize, whether it's Stanford, Mississippi, Carle Health, education, a number of large school districts, government, LA Parks and Recs, I think really led the charge into making Los Angeles healthy. And then across the workforce, a number of companies that are really focused on bringing their people back together safely and providing, that investment in human capital. We invest so much in our IT systems and our computers. We should really do the same for our most valuable resource, which is our humans.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. And thank you, Dr. Wade. We've got about 5 minutes left, and so I will go through and just start hitting the questions one at a time. This one comes from James DuBois. Have you heard of any FDA involvement happening yet this year for capability standard for healthcare? So the FDA does not regulate this particular space. Candidly, I believe they should. We are really regulated by the EPA, and so we register the devices, and they ensure that we do the appropriate testing at the right labs, and that the efficacy claims that we make are in fact backed up by science. But to date, the FDA has not regulated this space. What are your thoughts? This is from Karen Hoffman. What are your thoughts on use of upper room UV in the OR suite, sterile corridors, or changing rooms? Has the new ASHRAE 241 standard made any changes to the AER? So in terms of the changes, TBD, it is so new that I think everything is still in flight. The building codes are being rewritten right now to require this. So the first step in 241 was to figure out what the rules would be, and now it's being translated into the actual codes. In terms of the use of upper room in the healthcare, it's a wonderful fit. As I mentioned, in 1937, Dr. Darrell Hart conducted a study at Duke University, and this is where they saw a 98% reduction in HAIs with the operating theaters that had employed UVC. It is a perfect fit there. We have a number of healthcare customers that have gotten a lot of value out of our products, but I believe that that is definitely one of the areas where you would see a dramatic reduction in terms of risk. Next question was from Carolyn McGinnis. How will UV change our environmental cleaning and disinfecting? Can they do less? Definitely be able to do less. So what we've seen with our customers is across the board, they can't hire enough people. So they're looking for technology to provide them with capabilities and not require them to hire people one for one with need. The Vive product that Jennifer highlighted is a very simple sort of particularly good use case in restrooms. So as a reminder, far UV is on the spectrum of UVC, as Dr. Wade covered. UVC starts at about 200 nanometers and it goes up to about 280 nanometers. When you're at the lower end of that range, you have very human-safe wavelengths of light. A very famous radiologist at Columbia University, Dr. David Brenner, really discovered that 222 nanometer light is perfectly safe. Science has shown that 30,000 hours of exposure to that one wavelength of light does less cellular damage to skin and eyes than 10 minutes in the sun on a mild spring day. It also disinfects everything, very, very potent. And so what we've seen with customers is putting the far UV products in restrooms and allowing for an automated and continuous disinfection of that space. Obviously, we can apply it anywhere, but that's a pretty good example. Let's see. Is the cost of periodic replacement of the light engines, emitters, and beam? So when we sell beam, what comes with it is a year of our software and maintenance and the consumables, which are the light engines. And then on a forward basis, we offer a service contract, which again, continues to maintain the device, will replace the LEDs once required, and ensure that the system is operating. We also include that software that Jennifer walked us through very briefly, so you get access to that. How to contract customer support, troubleshooting, technical support. As I said, all of that is included with the purchase, and then there is the ongoing subscription, which will cover the consumables and maintenance, and then the access to the software itself. And so to the extent there's any issue, you reach out to us. We're very proud of the fact that products are incredibly stable. And so the expectation is once it's installed, it will just operate for you. I think I got them all. I try to go fast. I knew there was one question about selling through distributors. I saw and it dropped off, but and I wonder if the question came from a potential distributor. But yes, we have a two-tiered sales model where we will sell direct, but we also have channel partners that will sell. And so to the extent someone is interested in becoming a channel partner of ours, please reach out to us. And I think that's it. So I will just say thank you once again for everyone for participating today. Hope it was valuable. Again, the goal today was not to answer every question with regards to infection prevention for every industry. It was just to set the stage such that we can go deeper on all of the key verticals over the course of the next few webinars. But big thanks to Jennifer and Dr. Wade. They're getting some of their valuable time for this is really it makes us all very lucky. So any event, I hope everyone has a good day, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.